All right. Sorry, my desk's a bit askew. It's been a little while. I've actually had it prepped for reading for once. How is everyone? And by everyone, I mean 10 of you, because, of course, it's midnight here, and you're all probably about 3 hours ahead of me, at least. Pollen is absolutely murder today. Dear God. So I don't know how far we'll get into anything tonight, but I can't sleep, so I figured I would pretend I'm still sort of working when I'm not supposed to be. That vibe was immaculate. I agree. That's what I go for. I got a whole bunch of new computer parts today, so all I'm lacking is a power supply and some storage. So I should have a comically better setup, as my benefactor has called it, when I finally have all the parts together. By hopefully at the latest mid next month, so. Hell, we might even be able to do some Elden Ring. Alright, enough Nietzsche. We're streaming now. Okay, so. Got a couple of options here. None of which are particularly attractive to me, but they're all kind of awful in their own way. Actually, I tell a lie. One of them's actually kind of interesting. So, the first one is this, of course, Victoria 3 and the Decline of the West. I have no idea what to expect here. I came across this on a whim. It's apparently got 81,000 views despite the channel only having 3,000 subscribers, so that's interesting in and of itself. But someone appears, let's see, Victoria 3 isn't out yet, but that won't stop me from discussing how the game is reshaping the genre. In conjunction, I thought I'd bring up one of history's stranger yet influential contributors, a man named Oswald Spengler. This language is a little bit worrisome to me, one of history's stranger yet influential contributors. I don't know what he means. Contributor to history? Contributor to... the study of history? I have no notion. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, and it's not one that you typically see. So, I'm not one who thinks particularly much of Spengler, but he is interesting. He's sort of interesting in like an Ayn Rand kind of way, but he's significantly more competent than Ayn Rand, which is high praise, I know. But oh, thank you, Political Banana. You have a good night. So, we'll probably go over this. In addition, I'll just pop that on the screen now. Imperium Press, basically a independent publisher primarily concerned with reactionary and fascist material. Tragically, one of the only purveyors of Fustel de Collage's The Ancient City right now, unless you want to get a really garbage, what's that called when it's print on demand? They anyways released a first issue of a journal on political theory called Firstness, which is interesting language. But it has some interesting contributors. Joel Davis is first. Joel Davis, if you're not familiar, is someone we've had some mild interactions with in the past. He's an awful human being, but also a right-wing political thinker. Not a not a tremendously good one, but at the very least, this promises to be somewhat interesting. They do read things and they do interact with interesting material. I've covered a few of his discussions, especially with Keith Woods in the past, and it's been bad. But it's been bad at the very least in interesting ways, not generatively interesting ways. Like I don't think it's necessarily helpful, but it's interesting. And then I think there was a 9-minute video on the geopolitics of Dark Sun. So Dark Sun is a setting in Dungeons and Dragons, an alternative setting, I think. It's the setting of Planescape Torment. So I'm mildly interested in that. It's from a channel called Dungeon Masterpiece. In fact, let me pull that up quickly so we can see what this looks like. They seem to do, or he seems to do, just political analyses, specifically geopolitical analyses, which always is a red flag to me. Geopolitics as a category just seems extremely poorly defined. And it's sort of like international relations, just with an emphasis on, I guess, geography, but it bears all the same problems that international relations as a discipline bears, so, you know? And then Jason Blakely, who did that terrible, terrible video on Carl Schmitt that we went over, and it was terrible. Oh, that's unfortunate. Had a video on Rousseau on human slavery, so we have choices. If anyone has any preferences, actually, make them known, and I will try to accommodate you. I just realized you couldn't see any of the things I was scanning through. Where in the past are the videos on hand? Do you mean with respect to the Jason Blakely video, or do you mean the Joel Davis one? Because that's the Joel Davis one's way back. The Jason Blakely one is the last uploaded not video essay, but it's the last proper video I have up prior to the Keffels nonsense. Right-wing political thinker, horrible humans, same difference. Less so than you might think. I think if you're young and you're right-wing, you're probably pretty awful. I have known some decent people who are right-wing political thinkers, though. There's a tendency to kind of drift in that direction, sort of like nominally drift in that direction, distinct entirely from like contemporary political movements, just by dint of, just I guess, by dint of like the hardness of the subject matter. A lot of left-wing politics in particular sort of orbits around extending goods to underprivileged groups, etc., etc. And it can't, because it would be disadvantageous to do so. And not in a cynical sense, although also in a cynical sense, but not strictly in a cynical sense. It can't additionally layer on stuff like things like the effect on social cohesion, the effect on like stability over time, stuff like that, because you have to. The problem with debates around those things is even bringing in real concerns has the effect of giving ammunition to a specific side that may not necessarily actually be the most realistic. So it's complicated. Okay, so we seem to have a bit of a spread. I'll tell you what, let's do the geopolitics and D&D one first, because it's short. And then we'll see how I'm doing afterwards, and maybe I'll do the Joel Davis paper. I like that plan. Let's do that. Also, this guy seems good-natured, so this might not be miserable, even if I disagree with it. It's okay to disagree with stuff. I disagree with everybody.
Good evening, Dungeon Masters. I'm Baron DeRop. Breaking down
Baron.
a fantasy map through the lens of geopolitics, not the same thing as politics, can lend a Dungeon Master some awesome
Okay, I like that, but I don't like geopolitics, so we'll see where he goes with this.
insights about the game world they play in, or can be used to scrutinize the plausibility of a published module's world building. So today, we're doing just that. I'll be using the social science of geopolitics to dissect the region of Faerun. We'll be analyzing.
I don't like characterizing geopolitics as a social science. It is at best a particular specification of political science, which even that by itself is horribly underspecified. in the way it's taught in universities now. I don't like when these things that are horribly undefined and like massively sort of like disparate, like there's no one methodology, being treated as if they are some kind of coherent school, because they're not. There's no actual principles of geopolitics as such. There's just an asserted subject matter, and it has so much overlap with other things, and there's doesn't seem to be any consensus as to what that subject matter is. It's almost worse than religious studies, you know?
Analyzing the Sword Coast and the surrounding terrain based purely off the contents of the map published by Wizards of the Coast. Hopefully, this experiment will highlight some of the world-building concepts you can use in your own game, and possibly illustrate some disconnects between what would likely happen in real life and the canon of the Forgotten Realms universe. With that said, we will discuss exactly what geopolitics is and why it's a useful lens for world building. We'll break down the climate and geography of the Faerun region, and look at how various population groups would likely interact with each other based on the geography they exist in.
Okay, so this will be interesting just for itself, this first part. I'm very interested to see how he construes what geopolitics is and what his influences are. In fact, maybe if we look in the description, we can find that. Let's see, does he have... Oh... Nah, no citations. Whatever, that's fine. I don't always have citations either. Not in my description anyways. We'll see what he does.
So, let's get into it. I think it's worth defining what...
Are we back? Looks like we're back. Okay. When did we lose the connection? What was I saying before we lost the connection? God, I hate YouTube so much. No sources that far back, huh? Oh my god. Alright, let's just start again, I guess.
So, let's get into it. I think it's worth defining what this social science is and what it's not. Geopolitics is the study of how population groups are affected by the geography in which they live, and how that geography affects the way these population groups interact with each other.
So he's only specifying population groups as the subject matter, so this is basically just a sociological analysis. He's calling this geopolitics for no reason.
If a nation's political discourse would be focused on healthcare, for example, the geopolitical discussion about that subject would generally stop at fertility rates and demographics.
He doesn't even specify like geography at that point. He's just talking about sociology. There's nothing specifically political about this. So I don't know why we're calling this the geopolitics of Faerun. I think it's geopolitics is sort of a catch-all term for, I guess, any sort of analysis that isn't just world building in like alt history and fantasy circles. I think that's probably why this language is being used, because what alt hist uses that phrase all the time, but it doesn't mean anything. Besides the bare fact that he shows maps on the screen, geopolitics doesn't refer to a specific field of study. It doesn't have any particular subject. Like it's just bubkiss. I was nicer the first time through. I'm being a little bit terse this time because I've already said all of this before the stream died. So
Getting more zoomed in than that is simply too microscopic in scale to be useful at this level. Geopolitics is useful for world building because, using nothing but knowledge of climate and terrain, we can make guesses about a regional population's access to resources. With those things in mind, we can then look at the communities as a whole and make educated guesses about the needs and behaviors of those people.
I don't think that really makes a lot of sense though, because you can't determine where any particular people has access to resources because on the basis of those things existing by themselves, because people build settlements specifically where resources are to be found anyways, and those resources will be determined by what they can make positive use of, or in the event that you have like multiple different communities active at a given time, like their relationships between each other then would determine, like it's also underdetermined and yet also over deterministic. I don't know. I don't know. Like Thucydides, for example, gives an account of why Athens was able to succeed in the particular way that it did. And that's that it wasn't attacked when it was small, because it was in relatively arid territory, but was also on the sea, and so was able to become a trading hub, and in fact was forced to become reliant on trade, which is one of the historical reasons for its very peculiar development. But that doesn't tell you why Athens was there. That just tells you, that gives a possible explanation for why Athens survived and why it ended up engaged in the activities that it did that led to it having the specific history that it did.
Without water, life isn't possible. And without life, there is no society. So let's iron out the first resource: fresh water. The Sword Coast region looks to be mostly temperate in climate,
Why specifically freshwater if it's a fantasy world, right? I guess this is one populated by humans, that's fair.
with an ice shelf or massive glacier to the north. Glaciers, created by constant snowfall in high elevations, slowly glide toward lower elevations due to their immense weight and pressure. As a result, you'd expect to see channels carved into mountain areas below the ice shelf. The lowlands between these mountain chains should be scattered with large boulders and outcrops due to the glacier dragging mountain debris with it as it moves and depositing those debris at lower elevations. Go further from the foothills and you should be more likely to see floodplains or bogs. And it looks like Ed Greenwood, the writer of the Forgotten Realms, got this right. You can see the Anarok region, south of the glacier, is covered in hilly areas of massive boulders. But if you look closer to the coast, those rocky hills give way to swamps like the High Moor. In real life, you can see facsimiles of this kind of glacial activity all along Scandinavia. Norway is covered with deep chasms from glacial movement, while Finland is largely a swampy flatland that extends to the North Sea. All of this is from glacial activity that occurred during the Ice Age. With that said, this glacier informs the contours of the landmass. I bring this up first because glaciers contribute largely to the shape of the mountain terrain and lowlands, and therefore to the flow of water. This in turn informs where agrable farmland exists, and to some extent, stone and metal ores can be easily accessed. But what about the Faerun regions that aren't affected by the high ice?
That area with the desert was caused by magic, pretty sure. I mean, it would sort of make sense if if the author of this map was basing it off of a real map, and then didn't understand the relationships between the different topographical regions, I guess, is the term you would use. And then just gave, like, different sort of dumb fictional explanations for why places look the way they did. Like, you would have this desert as a result of runoff from the ice or whatever, but the author was just like, oh, there's a desert here, and that was caused by a sorcerer cursing the land or something, you know?
Glacier. If we look south of the various central mountain chains, we find the Sea of Fallen Stars. Since it's on the edge of the map, it's hard to determine exactly in what context this sea exists. But based on the forests that grow against the southern slopes of the mountains, we can assume that there is a moist sea breeze which carries water vapor off the sea and up the slopes.
Oh, the Sunset Mountains, I know those from, what was it called? Dark Alliance. I played that on the GameCube. It was very good. It was, basically my first Diablo.
Since the forests are on opposing sea coasts, I'll assume then that wind actually travels in a westward direction and shears across the mountains instead. Now, this is important because any wind that is able to lift over the mountains would likely drop its water vapor as it rises over the terrain. Any wind that manages to blow over the bluffs will be very dry. Again, the Forgotten Realms gets this correct too. The rocky terrain over the mountains from the forested regions is almost entirely barren. As a real-life example, you can see this happen in the Pacific Northwest. The cool, damp air coming from the Pacific hitting the mountain chain along the coast causes Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland to all have notably wet climates.
Hey, that's where I am.
But just 200 miles east and over the mountain chain, plant life can only grow at scale thanks to irrigation. There just isn't enough rainfall to support lush life. Moving northwest from the Sea of Stars, we don't see verdant ground until we get close enough to the coast that sea-based water vapor would rain back on the land.
You heard it here. Vancouver is and Vancouver Island is basically just forgotten realms with gas stations.
You can see this also in the central United States, where the landmass east of the Rocky Mountains is largely arid, but as you approach the Mississippi River, you find the most fertile landmass on the planet. This fertility is made possible by moisture blowing in from the Gulf region. The Sword Coast's sea-based rainfall is further implied in the southern region by the Giants Plain. Wherever you have large amounts of rainfall, you will also have lush growth. Worth noting though, while there isn't dense forest here, there has to be a large migratory fauna that keeps trees from growing. In the African savanna, large packs of wildebeest trample the soil as they migrate, preventing most saplings from surviving. In the Mississippi River Valley, bison take the place of wildebeest, and there are generally no massive regional forests. I'd be curious to see if there are any lore-specific migratory herd animals in the Giants Plain that enables the grassland to exist. Let me know in the comments if there are any canon justifications. Traveling west off the coast, we can see an island chain that looks to be a series of wetland atolls. These might be volcanic, or at least tectonic in nature, since they form an island chain, much the same way the Pacific Islands surrounding the South China Sea do. Lastly, I think it's important to mention the scale of this map. According to the legend, these islands are roughly the same size as the Philippines, and the High Moor is about the same size as Georgia, either the country or the American state, your pick. This entire Sword Coast region is roughly the size of the eastern US seaboard, or twice the size of continental Europe. So now we understand where the mountains are, from where the wind blows, and why that causes forests and grasslands to form. From that, we can discern where the stone and metal ores would be easily mined, and where rainfall gives way to farmland or timber. From that, we can deduce what resources the people who live in each region have and what resources they need. Now, we get into real geopolitics.
Okay, oh no. Oh no. Alright. Getting into real geopolitics, apparently.
Just because it's the name of the popular video game franchise, let's start by looking at Baldur's Gate. The city of Baldur's Gate is inset into the mouth of a large river. This was a common practice if there wasn't a safe harbor and the river was wide enough to allow large ships to traverse it. The river itself would become the harbor. The only reason I can guess Baldur's Gate would be larger than Candlekeep, as indicated by the size of the dot on the map, is due to the trade access it has with other cities along the river Cheon-Thar. Candlekeep doesn't have this luxury despite having a safer natural harbor. The coast around Baldur's Gate looks like it is made up of sheer cliffs, so there is likely access to limestone in the region too. The Cloakwood Forest provides more than enough timber.
Is that a safer natural harbor? Like, Baldur's Gate is not even at the mouth of a river. I guess it's harder to seal off the Candlekeep harbor because there are multiple points of exit, but I don't know.
For wood construction, so
see, here's the problem. Like, sure, it's easier to seal off the mouth of a single river opening, yes. Although there are still islands here that you can sort of see. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you have a clearer idea of what we're looking at. Around Baldur's Gate, there are still islands sort of peppering the exits, so there is still that. There are multiple avenues of escape. The river itself for an invading force, that would be extraordinarily difficult to take by sea, because your ships would be assailed from both sides as they entered the river. And if we're talking about a land invasion, again, Candlekeep would be easier to invade because these big islands that are off the coast, these aren't just a defensive thing for Candlekeep. These are also a base of operations for a navy. This is how Troy was besieged for 10 years. There was an island off the coast. The Greeks camped there with all of their ships, and then they could just keep coming back over and over again without risking assault from the Trojans.
Baldur's Gate only has one issue: security. Exposed in almost every direction, it has its work cut out for it to project any authority. Geography of this kind is why modern Poland is one of the most war-torn regions throughout history. The expansive grasslands make it very hard to defend. The Swedes, Germans, Russians, Lithuanians, Mongols, and even the French all have steamrolled through Poland's flat, grassy terrain multiple times. For Baldur's Gate, it gets even worse than just land-based security, though. The archipelago is likely full of people who would love nothing more than to disrupt trade going into Baldur's Gate, or at least skim a bit of trade revenue off the top. But we'll come back to the
Why would they want to disrupt trade? You'd want to engage in trade. Trade's good.
archipelago in a little bit. There's a road that connects Baldur's Gate to the region in the south, but I'm not seeing any large population centers in this area. To me, these roads only make sense if they exist as ruins from a fallen civilization, much the same way we can still find Roman roads today across Europe. To be clear, traveling over a road is expensive compared to water-based transport. Sometimes this cost is upwards of 20 times as expensive as its water-based counterpart. Tolls for patrols and highway maintenance must be paid, horses must be shoed and fed, and these expenses just don't have the same level of cost in deep water transport. Now, this road...
Well, the main thing is speed. It's you're traveling for much less time by sea. There's no natural obstacles. It's just... So just the cost of living while traveling is what brings it down, leaving aside everything else.
Road system does cross the Shining Plains and go off-map to areas called Tathir and Termish. If these roads are used despite the lack of population centers on the way, the distant locations must have some sort of rare material or product that's worth its exceptional expense. For a real-world example like this, you can look to the Chinese Silk Road. Communities would pop up along the highway that were large enough to sustain travelers as they caravanned across Asia. But it just didn't make any sense to have anything more than scattered outposts located roughly a day's worth of travel apart from one another. Additionally, European demand for silk was so high it warranted paying the exorbitant overland travel costs to bring silks across the Asian steppes. So I'm curious, what highly prized commodity would be traded from a contemporary context that would keep these roads maintained if they are? Looking north from here, we come to a forested mountain region containing the Dale Lands, Cormanther, Sembia, and Cormyr, crisscrossed with roads. Any population centers don't
This
seem
is
to
actually
have
interesting.
dots indicating their size, which tells me that their populations are negligible. Again, the investment of roads into this area...
I don't think so. I think I think what we're seeing is the populations are dispersed, and whoever made this map didn't really have any way of characterizing the existence of a community on a map if they didn't have like a walled city form, right? Because Baldur's Gate is literally a walled city, like it's a polis on some level. I don't think any of these communities really are that. They're kind of like... It's kind of like how Fangorn... Or not Fangorn Forest. Is it Fangorn Forest? What's the forest they're in the at the end of Fellowship of the Ring? It's not the Forest of Fangorn. Fangorn is where the Ents are. Lothlorien? Is that what it is? Might be Lothlorien. Anyways, the forest area where the elves are hiding, where Galadriel is. No, it is Galadriel. Yeah, Galadriel. I was thinking of Arwood for a second. It's Galadriel. Um, like there isn't like a defined city there with like a definite inside and an outside. There's just kind of like, ooh, we're in Elf Disneyland now, and there's no concrete sense, at least in the movies, of like what the actual structure of this thing is and how its economy works and how much space it actually takes up. I think that's sort of what's going on here.
Area, especially through such rocky and forested terrain, would likely be exceptionally expensive. And since the road system doesn't connect to the rest of the Sword Coast, I would imagine these roads were built by a fallen civilization. The current residents likely have nothing of value to offer large population centers like Baldur's Gate or Waterdeep. If they did, those roads would be indeed connected. I do find
The problem is, I think these roads in the game, or not the game, I guess it's still a game. These roads are they're like dirt roads, right? So if they were from some ancient civilization, they would have been, dissolved, or at the very least they'd probably go faster than any of the ruins around. But we don't I think see like the ruins of a massive civilization and evidence of massive overland trade within that civilization or within that empire or whatever it was. So like it's an interesting conjecture, but I don't. Well, here's a possibility. Supposing that the roads are not simply dirt roads that would just disappear over a couple of years. Um, what if the sea levels were much lower in the past? And so what appears to be like what now is surrounded by ocean at one time was actually like an extensive desert. Then maybe you'd have a similar situation to what he's describing with the Silk Road.
it interesting that there aren't large population centers here, though, especially in Cormyr or Sembia. The city of Marsember, especially, should be a very large and wealthy city.
Why?
It's positioned at the mouth of a river and is part of a larger road network for access to both land and sea based trade.
That does not mean it's a large city. There have been small coastal cities with lots of trade. That is not just its location does not dictate its size or its wealth or anything. Though that can be that's absolutely a factor. It's always a factor, but it's not determinative.
It has a natural harbor from the Sea of Fallen Stars. It likely gets consistent rainfall as made evident by the regional tree growth. It has access to stone and metal ore from the mountains, timber from the forests, and has plenty of farmland.
Well, is this farmland? We don't. All we know is it's green. I don't know if it's farmland. Like, does the legend say that all the green territory is farmland? This could be like, I don't know. Like, what's the temperature here? It could be almost like tundra, or it could be like rocky.
Additionally, the mountains that guard it onto
Like case in point, Vancouver Island has a lot of like fielded looking areas. Well, not fielded, they're fields. But if you try digging in, it's going to be just like broken up rock going down hundreds of feet. Growing stuff is going to be really difficult in a lot of those spaces. Now we do have farmland, we have lots of farmland, but we have also lots of fields that are going to be very, very difficult to grow things in.
two sides, and the two bodies of water flanking the region make the spot highly defensible and secure. This same geography is what led to the Romans, Lombards, and Italians becoming such a powerhouse of economic might in northern Italy. Some of the most desirable luxury goods in the world are made in this region. When all of a population's basic needs are met, food, clothing, and shelter, it allows the population to explore the rest of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The Renaissance started in a
See, like, yeah, that's not good. It's not how that works. So it works in Aristotle, it's not how that works.
location like this for a reason. Self-expression becomes
At a very low resolution. That's not exactly how it works in Aristotle, but it's the basic idea. Family gets together for living. Villages are extended families. Polis gets together for living well, or a polis is constituted for the sake of living well. And living well is like, I mean, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You take care of like the basic organic needs of life, and therefore you're able to actualize yourself, and you're able to have things like virtues and art and things like that. I mean, like there's you don't see polises popping up all over North America, for example. Despite the fact that again, like you have the capacity for all of this still. Decisions are made, ways of life are chosen, or ways of life are not thought of, or both. Um, like you do see things like cities, um, but not. There's no rule that says that given these material conditions, therefore a city will arise or a wealthy city will arise. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, just think about it. It's always conscious human beings with their own plans and beliefs and goals, um, making decisions in the world. Like none of this is determinate. We can be selfish, or we can have aims other than a specific notion of societal or political flourishing. We may lack entirely even a notion of those things such that can even be a part of our goals.
Becomes the money-making commodity of an area like this. Fast cars, high fashion, luxury cheese, meats, and wines are all enabled because northern Italy's geography provides so much stability. The fact that Marzember isn't as large as Baldur's Gate leaves me very curious if there is a canon reason for this. Again, let me know in the comments. Moving further north, we come to the region of Anarok, which looks like a rocky arid steppe, resembling modern Mongolia. The lack of trees or lush grass indicates a lack of rainfall in the region, so it makes sense that there are no large population centers. This doesn't mean that there aren't large numbers of people, however. The Mongols were nomadic herders who seasonally followed what little rainfall there was to provide pasture for their livestock. When the population began to grow past what the steppe would support, they began tribal infighting until Genghis Khan was able to unify them and turn their attention elsewhere. People who live a herding lifestyle on the steppe are usually quite sturdy compared to their urban counterparts. A cultural sense of mobility and toughness will always make people from regions like these formidable warriors. Some of the most terrifying threats to civilized Europe were horsemen who came from Central Asia. When their populations grew too cumbersome for their arid landscape to support, the Scythians, the Huns, the Magyars, and the Mongols all immigrated into Europe with devastating effect. I think it's funny that the grassland region that butts right up against the steppe is even named the Fields of the Dead, as if to indicate there might be prior struggles with these people. The larger metropolitan river system clustered around Baldur's Gate is at high risk of attack from this region, and invasion would likely occur at regular intervals. Next, let's turn our attention north to the high forest area on the northern expanse of the map. There seems to be a number of cities, presumably larger than what we saw in Cormanthor to the southeast, which is interesting because the geography does little to support such a population. The area is almost entirely landlocked and is scattered with dense forests and mountain chains. It's likely this area was also formed by glacial activity, but lacks.
That doesn't mean you wouldn't have large populations. Some of the largest cities in the ancient world were in the Middle East. Like, look at the size of a city like Balkh, for example. Like, these things were massive. It would take you days to go around them.
Any large migratory animals that would have prevented forests from growing. As a result, any economic movement through the region would be extremely costly. Moreover, the swamplands of Evermore, the High Moor, and the Marsh of Shalember all work to further prevent easy access to the coast.
Yeah, but the fact they're wetlands means that you can grow crops there, right? Like, that's what the Aztecs did. You can... This does not... You could have huge populations in a region like this. There's no contradiction here. It's not necessarily you would, but you absolutely could.
People who live here are likely extremely self-reliant and very paranoid and mistrusting of outsiders.
Yeah, what's the issue with this? Is like... This looks like tremendously, like, lush, hospitable territory. I don't see the problem.
Anything they have created themselves, and without access to large amounts of lakes or rivers, the region would likely not have a large population center. The people who live here would be tribal, superstitious, and easily prone to infighting. poverty and a lack of education would also be rampant. Without easy access to the larger regional economy, advances in science and magic just simply wouldn't get exposure here.
Well, hang on a second. What do you mean lack of access? Like look at this map by itself. Now, someone can correct me on this, but this looks like a river that goes directly to where Baldur's Gate is. And then, wasn't there like an archipelago, like out at sea? Like, there's tons of access to water. Unless that's a mountain. No, I think that's a water body, because yeah, there's a rivers. Yeah, so I don't know what he's talking about. I like this guy. This is genuinely, like, interesting and intelligent. It's just, you know, nitpicking's kind of my job. But I like this one, though. This guy seems nice.
You can see this very thing happen in the state of West Virginia. Poverty is high, family and clan-based grudges are famously rampant, and now that the coal industry has all but shut down, people who can afford to usually end up leaving the state.
It's not because of the geography. You're in a modern state with a... No, it's not how that works.
Unless there is a specific and rare mineral that can be mined out of this region, there likely isn't much opportunity for development or the people who live here. Traveling west, we come to the famous Neverwinter region. Rolling hills and forests butt up against the shoreline, and the scattered mountains exist throughout. The cities of Luskan, Neverwinter, Thornhold, Waterdeep, and Daggerford are all on or near the mouth of a river delta, and have access to either stone or timber for construction. The scattered hills, mountains, and forests make this coastal region pretty safe from terrestrial-based attacks, unlike Baldur's Gate, but it still has a major weakness. All of these cities are easily hemmed in by naval activity hailing from the coastal archipelago. As a result, these roads are actually believable. Losing sight of a shoreline or leaving the visual distance of a city would...
Yeah, but think about this for a second. From the archipelago, look at... Okay, he's going to look at the archipelago in a second, then we'll get into it, but we'll talk about the problems there in a moment.
Likely result in privateering from the island people. So it's likely much safer to conduct trade over these highways. With Neverwinter discussed, we can focus on the archipelago.
Okay, here we go. What do you notice about the archipelago versus the mainland? Again, we're concerned about naval action from the archipelago overpowering the ports on the mainland. What do we notice? Okay, since we're being all geopolitical about this. All those trees on the mainland side, that's what boats are made of. All those not trees on the archipelago side, that's going to make making a large navy difficult and expensive. Where would they get the wood for the boats? Probably from trade. So there would be almost no reason whatsoever and no means whatsoever for the archipelago peoples, whatever they are, to attack the ports on the mainland. They would be profoundly weak. They would not have the ships for it. Every ship lost would be of significantly greater cost. And to what end when you can just trade with ports for the stuff that you need? Like, if your intention is to stay on the archipelago, which it seems like it would be if all they're interested in doing is piracy, like, what's the point? Like, you can acquire all of the resources from the mainland through trade. Like, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Difficult and expensive, but not impossible. It's not impossible because nothing's impossible technically, but why would you get the notion to do so, right? And you'd learn like very quickly from it being very difficult. Like keep in mind too, Baldur's Gate is just one coastal city. You would have to deal with all of the coastal cities if you had piracy taking place. Are obvious. These islands lack resources.
These coastal islands are very similar to the first island chain surrounding the South China Sea. Those nations of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan all create a buffer zone that prevent China from projecting power into the Pacific and Indian Ocean. Make a note here, China has never once had a strong naval presence. City-states have historically been far more wealthy than mainland China. At worst, the disparate islands could each have their own segmented political interests that all cause friction with each other. If that's the case, the island populations won't be able to cause much more disruption than piracy. But if the disparate people are politically aligned at all, their ability to project naval authority and conduct seaborne tax collection would be unparalleled by the mainland populations. The people of Cair Corwell on Gwyneth Island have great access to timber and can safely build ships without any risk of their shipyards being attacked on land.
So it depends on how large these forests are, I guess. He says they have great access to timber. This seems sparse to me. But I don't know.
Lastly, if there is a continental power that has a magic or technology,
There's something else too. And this is touched on in Andrew Lambert's Sea Power States. To have a dedicated navy for combat, they have no economic value. You need a trained population to man them. I don't see any particular reason to expect that this archipelago, I mean, maybe, like, I played Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. Baldur's Gate did not seem poor or low tech, as they say. It also didn't seem like it had any kind of naval presence whatsoever. So maybe that's just the Dark Alliance games not doing a good job of fleshing out the environment. But it seemed like a late medieval European town, basically. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It this doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
that far outpaces what the island people have. They would rapidly turn these populations into client states or exert direct control over them. Whoever has dominion over these islands has dominion over the Sword Coast. As an example, look at the belligerent stance China is taking towards Taiwan. Its threats, while scary, are mostly invalid. To control Taiwan would require an amphibious assault of the island. To be clear, China only gets to trade on international waters because the US Navy and their islander allies allow it. Similar to
Okay, but the crucial element in that description is the U.S. Navy and Islander allies allow it, right? Like the U.S. is a major operative factor here. We haven't seen the existence of a major power backing the archipelago peoples in Forgotten Realms. We just have the islands, and apparently the geography entails inevitably that they are more powerful than the very advanced city structures that we see situated along the entirety of the coast. I don't know.
how if China could somehow miraculously invade Taiwan, Baldur's Gate would gain quite a bit of needed breathing room if it didn't have to worry about pirates, privateers, or even foreign trade policy interfering with their local economy. So what do you think? Are there fantastical creatures or magical locations that upset the hypotheticals I've presented? What are the inconsistencies with the geopolitical overview and the actual canon of the Sword Coast region?
I don't know nothing about the canon of the Sword Coast region, so I can't even speak to there being, like... I do know that dragons in Forgotten Realms are not... they're not, like, common things. There is a... I know in Baldur's Gate, there are, like, massive crime syndicates sort of operating beneath the surface. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think this does the work he needs it to do. I like this analysis, like it was interesting. I don't see how it was geopolitical until the very end. What it really was geographic determinism, which is not the same thing as geopolitics. Whatever geopolitics is taken to be. The crucial point is there's very little about this that actually has to do with politics as such. Now, if you went into like how a certain political structure that's facilitated by a certain environment would give rise to domination by sea and a particular motive to be aggressive towards the cities on the coast. Different story, but it's not really what we're seeing here. There's areas far away from Baldur's Gate that are basically balkanized dragon states. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna go grab some more tea and we'll look at something else, then I'm gonna go to sleep because the pollen is murdering me, so I'll be right back. Also, let me know what time it is where you are, because it's just going on to 1 a.m. for me and I'm a little bit curious. Oh dear, it appears I've left the kazoo Evangelion music on the playlist. That's unfortunate. Well, I guess you're all awake now, aren't you? Oh, the pit of it all. Alright, let's take a look at this thing. Alright. Make me smaller. So this is, War by Epistemic Means by Joel Davis. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I just want to browse through it. Person Sunday, what's... I'm so sorry about that. I need to clear out the stream music playlist because I have a long playlist with stuff that just scrolls through, and I figured, oh, I'll leave it alone. It's fine. It's probably just going to be more of the you know, the royalty free stuff. But no, I had Calm Suso Todd with kazoos. Lovely. What's your go-to nighttime tea? Just chamomile. It's cheap. It makes you sleepy. Although my preference is lavender. Up all night writing for an intro to SOC class. Sociology? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't like my introduction to sociology, but it got a lot more interesting later on. Put that shit back on, it goes hard. I already put it on for, what did I play it for? I think I played it for the first Mr. Girl stream. Alright, we're not going to go too deep into this one because it's very late. Later for you than it is for me, so... let's read a bit of the intro and then I'll kind of scroll through and see if we can find something interesting. This is by Joel Davis. We've had interactions with him before. Nasty piece of work. But he writes, so... let's see. Sociological nihilism. In my paper from issue 2, I'm assuming... oh, this is issue 3 of Firstness. I see. Okay, so this is the third volume. In my paper from issue 2, Ideological Exile and the Phenomenology of Authority, that's a mouthful, I gave a critique of sociological functionalism. The argument I gave is that conceiving of society as a quote-unquote system relies on a circle of presuppositions that render it impossible to conceive of a purpose to its functioning beyond mere functionality itself. Okay. This impossibility translates into an impossibility for the sociological functionalist. I don't know what a sociological functionalist is. To concede legitimacy to any authority which violates his model of what constitutes this quote-unquote functionality. This line of thinking abolishes the ethical from the political. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. The continued functioning survival of the system is its only fundamental reason to exist. Sociology as a practice therefore arbitrarily imposes a nihilistic self-conception upon the political. What? Sociology as a practice therefore arbitrarily imposes a nihilistic self-conception upon the political as exemplified by the progressive rejection of metaphysics in favor of instrumentalized social sciences by the American ruling class from the early 20th century onward. Jesus Christ. Okay. Alright. Let's Encyclopedia Brown this bitch. I 1408 is a good movie, by the way. Um, okay. Conceiving of society as a system relies on a circle of presuppositions that render it impossible to conceive of a purpose to its functioning beyond mere functionality itself. Well, no. Presumably, if you're conceiving of it as a system, therefore, there's some kind of process, you know, that the system is a description of, or that that perpetuates, and that's a description of that perpetuation is sort of the system, maybe. So, such a description, of course, is ultimately just describing the function, but that doesn't impose mere functionality or the mere functionality of the process as its only reason to exist. That's just a scientific description at a certain level of analysis. So, this impossibility translates into an impossibility for the sociological functionalist to concede legitimacy to any authority which violates his model of what constitutes its functionality. Concede legitimacy to any authority which violates his model of what constitutes its an authority is a particular. Does he mean an academic authority, or does he mean like an authority within society? This line of thinking abolishes the ethical from the political. I need to see an argument for that. I don't. That doesn't make sense. The ethical is a system. Like, even if you read Aristotle, like a major theme is going to be there are in modern parlance there are specific material conditions of virtue. Like, among other things, you can't be courageous in a rational way without being within a community that's able to wage war and therefore give you conditions in which specific kinds of martial virtue are thinkable. You need to have certain relationships of resource exchange to be able to have the kind of wealth that allows you to be what's the word, not magnanimous, magnificent in terms of your generosity, or to be liberal at a slightly lower level. Magnificence is liberality for Aristotle is generosity with your things, with your possessions. Magnificence is the liberality of the wealthy. Similarly, like magnanimity is the generosity of, or not the generosity, it's the graciousness of the great, right? Like, you need a certain community structure in order to be able to facilitate those virtues. So this just doesn't follow at all. Sociology as a practice, therefore, arbitrarily imposes a nihilistic self-conception upon the political. He hasn't made a case for this. He's just described a very impoverished notion of what sociology does here, that it conceives of society as a system. But then he just assumes that because you conceived of it as a system, that therefore you're imposing a nihilistic self-conception. I'm assuming of like a purely systematic level of analysis, as opposed to what? Like, does he think like social tendencies or behaviors are like spilling out from some other dimension or from God or something? What's the argument here? Sociology is a practice, therefore, as exemplified by the progressive. So he's talking about progressives, not the. No. Okay, by the. Well, I don't know actually. Does he mean the progressive rejection in terms of like a rejection that is progressing, or does he mean a rejection by progressives in the American ruling class? Exemplified by the progressive rejection of metaphysics in favor of instrumentalized social sciences by the American ruling class. What the fuck is he talking about? The rejection of metaphysics? Do you mean by philosophers? Because if he's talking about like something Heidegger's talking about, Heidegger's talking about philosophers, not the American ruling class. Also, what is the American ruling class? What is he talking about? the American ruling class. Okay. Let's press on a little bit. As I argued in my previous paper, the ethical significance of the political must transcend the mere functioning of society. Okay, that's fair. Functions only have value in terms of what they are functioning for. Sure. The development of this nihilistic political self-conception in modernity, fucking hell, demonstrates that society can function without a fundamental purpose. Of course it can without a fundamental purpose. It always functions without a fundamental purpose. Every single person in a society has their own purposes for doing what they do within it. There's no fundamental like intentionality behind it. No one goes, I will make a society to do this. That's not how that works. I mean, they do, like Alexandria was a thing, but it's like, I mean, like, besides the bare fact of existing as a society for the inherent goods of existing as a society, but I don't think Joel would characterize that as a fundamental purpose. However, we can trace the roots of this political nihilism far deeper than the discipline of sociology. Oh no. We see in the godfathers of modern political philosophy, Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Spinoza, a conception of the political as power producing order for its own sake. That's not what Machiavelli was about at all. It's not what Hobbes was about. I need to read Spinoza's Politics, but no. Machiavelli had a deep republican ethic. You I'll go into it later. This is wrong though. Hobbes had a mechanistic explanation for how political order arises, as sort of an account he derives from the activity of the bourgeois subject that surrounded him in his time. Self-consciously, like he knew he was doing this. He didn't think he was therefore historically wrong, but he knew what he was doing. Okay. Conception of the political as power producing order for its own sake. For power's sake or order's sake, it's not specific. For all three of these theorists, despite their differences, we are to embrace the production of order by power because we lack the power to do otherwise. To quote Spinoza, the sovereign power in a state has right over a subject only in proportion to the excess of its power over that of a subject. Okay. This actually is Spinoza's critique of the Hobbesian view that the political is a response to the anti-sociality of the state of nature. Spinoza argues instead that the political is a reflection of nature. For Spinoza, power is natural, not artificial, yet both Spinoza and Hobbes agree that political power is the only thing that stands between us and the socially degenerative violence of our fellow man. Well, no, it's not socially degenerative in a state of nature. Politics is the result, actually, of the powerfully social influence of the state of nature. The state of nature is something we despise. It pushes us into a society. That's Rousseau's counter to Hobbes, is that actually the kinds of scarcity and the kinds of covetousness and the kinds of hatred and resentment and pride that move us to actually engage in antisocial behavior in a state of nature don't exist. They're the products of society. To be fair, he is summarizing a previous paper here. I don't know if he can salvage this in the previous paper. We'll continue, but he's not... Either he's summarizing it really badly, or this actually makes no sense. And I think the latter, because the claims he's making here aren't correct. They're wrong. Where Spinoza and Hobbes conceived of the purpose... Oh, let's move up a little bit. Where Spinoza and Hobbes conceived of the purpose of the political from the perspective of society as a whole, Machiavelli's focus was upon the practice of sovereignty itself. What? For Machiavelli, power was an expression of princely ambition and entirely dependent upon a masterful balancing of ruthlessness and the inspiration of loyalty. No, it's not entirely dependent upon the inspiration of loyalty, or even a masterful balancing of ruthlessness. Where the hell did you get that notion? Holding your state and doing great deeds, because Machiavelli is an exceptionally ethically minded thinker, has to do with courting fortuna correctly. So you need to be able to, you need to have like the historical and the practical wisdom to recognize opportunities and to take them at the opportune moment, and to have the boldness to take risks, and to have the pragmatic knowledge and skill and confidence to break the rules when you know it will, or when you have reasonable grounds to think that the outcome will be worth it. No, the point to Machiavelli is that your goal is not the constitution of a perfect character in yourself. Your goal is the good of your community, and you staying in a position to be the author of that good, or to have some level of control over that. This is like, Machiavelli will never say something to the effect of like, power is entirely dependent upon a masterful balancing of ruthlessness and the inspiration of loyalty. Again, it all comes back to that section on fortresses. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, no. You never rely entirely upon a fixed point, because the essence of Machiavelli is that the world is in constant flux, and you need to respond to it appropriately. This concept of power for power's sake, that's what virtue is in Machiavelli, as opposed to virtue. Virtue is the qualities of character that enable you to react effectively and appropriately, and to have the constitution to carry out the things that need to be done in order to A, hold on to power, but B, for the sake of the good of your city. Like, a vicious person actually lacks in many ways the capacity to actually be a good prince. Among other things, they don't have the concern for the well-being of their city that would actually make them good rulers. This concept of power for power's sake was in sharp contradistinction to the medieval concept of sovereign legitimacy being constrained to the role of custodian over a divinely instantiated legal order. The enlightened absolutism of Hobbes and Spinoza was essentially a means of justifying this naturalistic conception of political power given by Machiavelli in proto-sociological terms. Machiavelli doesn't give a naturalistic conception of political power at all. No, that's just wrong. All states are either republics or principalities. Power is either inherited or it is gained through... Well, let me actually pull it out directly. All states and dominions that have had and continue to have power over men have and still are either republics or principalities. Principalities are either hereditary, in which instance the family of the prince has ruled for generations. This is the Oxford edition of the Prince. Or they are new, The new ones are either completely new, as was Milan for Francesco Sforza, Francesco Sforza, or they're like appendages added to the hereditary state of the prince who acquires them, as is the Kingdom of Naples or the King of Spain. Dominions taken in this way are either accustomed to living under a prince or are used to being free, and they are gained either by the arms of others or by one's own, either through fortune or through virtue. The point throughout all of Machiavelli is that there is no single rule in all cases. You need to be able to be savvy, brave, and pragmatically good or cruel as the situation demands. There are no fixed points in this theory by design. That's why Machiavelli is profoundly unsystematic as opposed to a lot of these other thinkers. Now, this move to making all communities constituted specifically through human action and not being downstream from like a mythic history or from like the cultivation of virtue, or like in an Aristotelian mode where you have like, you know, like an internalistic model where you're looking at the qualities of the community itself as an explanation for how it came to be. That move to all societies being the product of human action, that permits you to have explanations like in Hobbes, where you have a mechanism by which communities arise from a state of nature, the first communities, how you get the ball rolling on that front. But no, Machiavelli is not naturalistic. Power's production of civic order may be self-interested, but the proto-sociological accounts given by Enlightenment political philosophy pointed out that this is all not merely for the prince's benefit, as the subjects also benefit immensely from participation in civil society. Power, therefore, did not simply need to rely on its own cunning, as Machiavelli taught. What? Power doesn't have cunning, it's power. Or upon divine sanction, as by way of the proto-sociology of Hobbes and Spinoza. What? As by way of the proto-sociology of Hobbes and Spinoza, it could claim legitimacy through appeals to its role in facilitating society's functionality. Okay. Power doesn't produce civic order, though. In Hobbes, I don't know about Spinoza, but in Hobbes. Like, insofar as by power we just mean the investing of force in a third agent, then I suppose it sustains civic order, but you already have the rudiments of civic order prior to that power being erected. That's what the social contract is. Power's production of civic order may be self-interested. What does that mean? Self-interested for whom? The power is derived from the civic order. That's the point. He has the causality wrong. It doesn't. No. Hobbes' argument is not that, well, you know, the king's selfish and greedy and evil, but you know, it's better with him than without. That's not Hobbes' argument. The purpose of Hobbes' argument is that the king may be cruel, but you author that cruelty, right? Or the law may seem to be bad, but you author the law by taking on its benefits by being here in this community. Like, the idea that the rules are for the good of society, that's not a new thing by Hobbes. The the innovation of Hobbes is that the structure of the community itself is authored by it's by its subjects, and it derives its legitimacy therefrom. I think he's using power interchangeably with the person exercising power. Yeah, it seems to be. Would you recommend The Prince and Leviathan? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Start with The Prince. It has the very great merit of being short. Leviathan does not. Oh, how much further does go? Oh, dear God, this is long. Epistemic weapons. The purpose of my explication of sociological nihilism, then, is not to reject the social sciences, but to limit them to their proper position in Hume's is-ought distinction. Jesus Christ. The social sciences cannot tell us what society ought to be. This is the key takeaway from my critique of sociological functionalism. I'm just gonna... I haven't heard this term before. Let me look this up quickly. I know what functionalism is, but I haven't heard of sociological functionalism. Yeah, I've never heard that term before. I don't know if he's, like, responding to somebody. But generally, functionalism just refers to the fact that, like, the elements in a community are there because they serve a role in the continuance of that community. So, like, it's I don't know what he means. Oh God. Okay, here it comes. The existential question of society, I believe, is fundamentally a theological question. Theology being an inquiring into the absolute purpose of existence. No, it's not. Theology is an inquiring into God presuming his existence, which you cannot do if you are actually trying to limit the social sciences to their proper position in Hume's is-ought distinction. The problem with nihilism has been most fundamentally a question dealt with by existentialists, existentialism being the philosophical inquiry into the meaning of the human condition. This paper is a defense of bracketing social science from social existentialism. Social science being the question of what society is from what society ought to be. This distinction is not ontological, but epistemological, as obviously the questions of what society ought to be must ultimately be embedded in what society is in political practice. However, before we can engage in this embedment, we must first work these things out on their own terms, as otherwise we will conflate an existential critique of the social sciences for a technical critique and lose technical precision. This does not seem worth taking very seriously. Look, I went down to the fish ladder the other day, which is, it sounds weird, but it's actually a really cool structure. So the idea, I don't, if you've ever never seen a fish ladder, it's like a tiered waterfall, so it allows fish to like swim up the thing. But I go down there every so often. Why? Because ever since the area flooded because of the storms a little while ago, there have been centipedes all over the mulch in the embankment around the pool the fish ladder feeds into, and I find them fascinating in a horrific sense. I just go down and I look for them, and I take pictures sometimes, and I go far away from where the centipedes are, and I read because it's a cool ambient place, and it's like I'm in Sekiro but lamer with gas stations nearby. Um, all that to say, I am looking at this out of sheer morbid curiosity. No, it is absolutely not worth taking seriously. But we are the music makers and we are the dreamers of the dreams. I have a rule about books, essays, etc. Any kind of text. A text should be able to be summarized in no more than 2 sentences. Why? There are lots of texts you can't summarize in 2 sentences. That are just, they're just complicated. Summarize Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy in 2 sentences. Like, good God. Summarize Marx's Capital in 2 sentences. Summarize Plato's Republic in 2 sentences. You can't do that. That's silly. Technical precision is vital to uphold because the social sciences are the epistemic arms of political practice. As Clausewitz said, politics is war by other means. Hang on. Hang on a sec. Let me double check something. No, he's got it backwards. Politics isn't war by other means. War is politics by other means. Let me actually get the exact quote. Where are you? I know you're here. Is it on my other shelf? I don't think so. I would have had it here. That's one I use a lot. Damn. It's a red one. Hang on. Sorry. Bear with me. Ah, it must be on my other shelf. Damn. That's frustrating. Anyways, he has it backwards. It's war is politics by other means, not politics is war by other means. Politics is primary for Clausewitz. So much for technical precision. Um, damn it. You know what? I'm gonna go find it. Give me one moment. Here we are. Alright, sorry about that. God, I need to replace this thing. This is getting not good. Okay. Come on. So this is the translation by. Let's see if I can find. Oh, that's frustrating. Anyways, this is the copy recommended by Hugh Strawn, who wrote The Direction of War. It's in the Book of War, which also comes with the translation of Sun Tzu's The Art of Warfare. But this is how this translation renders the sentence that Joel Davis is butchering here. This is from the introduction by the author. Apart from this difference existing in fact between wars, we must further expressly and exactly establish the point of view, no less necessary in practice, from which war is regarded as nothing but the continuation of state policy with other means. This point of view, everywhere maintained, will bring much more unity into our investigation, and everything will be easier to disentangle. Although this point of view will chiefly find its application in Book 8, nevertheless it must be fully explained in Book 1, yada yada yada. So, yeah, he's got it backwards. A lot of work just to make that point. I could have just Googled it, I guess. Whatever. We'll blame it on the pollen. It's addling my brain a little bit. Yeah, this is Bubkus. So what is society then? Fundamentally, society is an organized field of human interaction. To build an elementary model of society, we must therefore identify the minimal conditions of social organization. Why do you think so? This is so amateurish. And of course, there's no bloody bibliography. Due to the right's affirmation of hierarchy and hostility to the institutionalized ideological orthodoxy. What do you mean the right's affirmation of hierarchy? The left is strictly hierarchical. Unless you're talking about anarchists, and even they end up being hierarchical in the end. Nah, this is garbage. Anyways, we get the idea. It's late. I think it's time to call it a night. Alright, well, that's it for tonight. It's 1:42 a.m. Yeah, I'm not a fan of James Joyce either. I have a gorgeous copy of Ulysses, but I like the first chapter. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan, the snot green sea, the scrotum tightening sea. Like, I like that stuff. Gets really boring after that. Will this help from Joel? Sociological functionalism is the presupposition that society can be best understood as a system and is therefore descriptively reducible to a nexus of functions. Well, that whole... A system isn't exhaustively described as a nexus of functions. Like, for one thing, what the hell is a nexus of functions? Typically, you think of, a system is typically a closed, like a closed and perpetual sequence of processes, right? Like, it's not just a nexus of functions. I don't know what that means, a nexus of functions. Like, where a bunch of functions intersect. Like, everything's a nexus of functions. Just taking those words at face value. So no, that doesn't really help. It's just a bad, aggressively pretentious essay that doesn't make any sense. Alright, have a good night, everyone. Take care.